A humble boy dreamed of a better future, selling candy to help his family survive. On the day he rescued a magnate's son from turbulent waters, he believed his luck would finally change. Instead of money, he asked only for a decent job for his father, not knowing that this would put them on a dangerous path. What began as a heroic act became a battle for truth, where justice and friendship would prove their true worth. If this story interests you, subscribe to the channel to receive all our exciting stories. Continuing. On the shore of Gator Lake, where the calm waters reflected the sky of Georgia, lived Jack, a 10-year-old boy who carried in his brown eyes the strength of someone who learns early to face life. His house, a simple construction of exposed bricks, sheltered not only him but also his parents, Tom and Sarah, and his younger sister, Emily, who was 5 years old. The family didn't have much, but they maintained their dignity through honest. Every morning before sunrise, Jack helped his mother prepare the sweets he would sell on the neighborhood streets. They were brownies, coconut candies, and peanut brittle that Sarah made masterfully, filling each one not just with ingredients, but with love and hope for better days. The boy knew every corner of those streets, every tree that could serve as shelter from the sun, every park bench where potential customers usually sat. Fresh sweets, homemade brownies, coconut candies made on the spot. His voice echoed through the streets of the New Horizons neighborhood, a name that seemed ironically hopeful for a place where many families struggled daily for survival. That October afternoon, the heat was particularly intense. Jack had sold only half of his sweets and decided to take a break in the shade of a large oak tree near the lake. From there, he could observe the mansions on the other side of the shore, with their well-manicured gardens and blue pools that looked like small pieces of sky fallen to earth. It was a completely different world from his own, separated not just by water, but by a social abyss that seemed insurmountable. It was then that a scream cut through the air, making Jack jump from his spot. In the water, a few meters from the shore, a boy was flailing desperately. "Help, I can't swim!" The words came out choppy, interrupted by the water entering his mouth. Without thinking twice, Jack dropped his candy box and ran towards the lake. His heart was racing. He wasn't an experienced swimmer either. He had learned only the basics in games with neighborhood friends, but something inside him propelled him forward. He jumped into the water and, with clumsy but determined strokes, reached the boy who was still thrashing about. "Calm down! If you keep moving like that, you'll pull us both down," shouted Jack, remembering the advice his father always gave about water accidents. The other boy gradually calmed down, and Jack managed to hold him in a way that both could keep their heads above water. With great effort, swimming on his back and pulling the boy with him, Jack began to return to the shore. His muscles burned, and the extra weight made every movement a battle. But he didn't give up. When his feet finally touched the bottom of the lake, both were exhausted, but safe. On the shore, a small crowd had already formed, including a tall, well-dressed man who ran towards the boys as soon as they came out of the water. It was Robert Anderson, one of the most influential businessmen in the region, and, as Jack would soon discover, the father of the boy he had just saved. "Ryan, my son, are you okay?" asked Robert, hugging his soaked son. Ryan, still coughing a little, nodded. His face was pale, but his blue eyes already showed relief. Robert then turned to Jack, who was wringing out his wet shirt, worried about the sweets he had abandoned. "You saved my son's life," said the businessman, his voice choked with emotion. "How can I thank you? What's your name, young man?" Jack looked at the man, then at Ryan, who was watching him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "My name is Jack, sir, and you don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "No, Jack, not everyone would have had the courage you did," replied Robert, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Let me repay you somehow. What do you wish for? You can ask for anything." Jack felt the weight of that offer. He could ask for a video game console, like the ones he saw in store windows, or a new bicycle since he's had flat tires for months. But thinking of his father, who had been looking for a better job for so long, the answer came naturally. "Sir, if you can... My dad needs a job. He's very good with machines and maintenance. If you could give him an opportunity..." Robert Anderson's eyes widened, surprised by the maturity of that request. Ryan, who had been observing the scene in silence, broke into a smile of admiration. That, seemingly simple, moment would mark the beginning of a friendship that would forever change the lives of the two boys. The morning after the incident at the lake, Tom, Jack's father, put on his best shirt and headed to Robert Anderson's office. His heart was racing as he crossed the glass doors of the imposing corporate building. He had never imagined he would be there, much less for a job interview obtained through his son's courage. Jack, who had insisted on accompanying his father, waited in the lobby, along with Ryan, who had made a point of being present. The two boys, still a bit shy, began to exchange the first words that would start a deep friendship. "Do you always sell sweets around here?" asked Ryan, genuinely interested. "Every day," replied Jack proudly. "My mom makes the best brownies." "In town?" "I'd love to try them," said Ryan, his eyes shining with curiosity. In the office on the top floor, Robert was personally interviewing Tom, impressed with his practical experience and honesty. "Your son demonstrated exceptional character yesterday," commented the businessman. "Now I understand where that integrity comes from." Tom was hired as a maintenance supervisor, a position that not only offered a decent salary, but also benefits that the family had never had before. Health insurance, meal vouchers, and the possibility of a better future were now within reach. On the way back home, father and son could barely contain their joy. "Jack, you have no idea what you've done for our family," said Tom with tears in his eyes. "But remember, the most important thing isn't the job, it's the dignity with which we do our work." In the weeks that followed, the family's life began to change gradually. Sarah was able to buy better ingredients for her sweets, and Emily finally got the complete school supplies she had been dreaming of. Jack, although he no longer needed to sell sweets every day, insisted on continuing to help his mother on weekends, now by choice and not out of necessity. The friendship between Jack and Ryan blossomed in a surprising way. The rich boy discovered a new world through his friend's eyes, while Jack learned that not everything that glittered on the other side of the lake was gold. Ryan confessed his loneliness amidst so much luxury and how he envied the unity of Jack's family. "You know, sometimes I wish my mom would make sweets like yours," Ryan confided during an afternoon when he was visiting Jack's simple house. "She's always busy with her charity events and social parties." Melissa, Ryan's mother, didn't look kindly on her son's closeness to the boy from the humbler part of town. "Ryan, you need to understand that there are certain social differences we can't ignore," she would say, adjusting the pearls on her neck. "But Mom, Jack saved me." "And he's my best friend," Ryan protested, demonstrating maturity beyond his years in defending the friendship. Robert, on the other hand, encouraged the boys' closeness. He saw in that friendship an opportunity for his son to develop values that money couldn't buy. He frequently invited Jack and his family for Sunday lunches at his mansion, much to Melissa's displeasure. During one of these lunches, Sarah brought a surprise, a tray of her famous brownies. Melissa, initially reluctant, was convinced by Ryan to try them. Her expression transformed as she tasted the sweet. "This is extraordinary," she admitted, to everyone's delight. "Where did you learn to make something so delicious, Sarah?" "Family recipe, Mrs. Anderson. Passed down from mother to daughter for generations," Sarah replied, proud. That seemingly simple moment marked the beginning of a small change in Melissa. The social barriers, so solid in her mind, began to show their first cracks. At the office, Tom stood out for his dedication and technical knowledge. His practical experience brought innovative solutions to problems that had long afflicted the company. Robert began to trust his opinions more and more, quickly elevating him to positions of greater responsibility. Jack and Ryan, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world, strengthened their bonds every day. They shared dreams, fears, and discoveries. Ryan helped Jack with subjects he struggled with at school, while Jack taught his friend the small joys of simple life. One afternoon, sitting by the shore of the same lake that had united them, Ryan made a confession. "You know, Jack, before I met you, I thought I needed a lot of things to be happy. Now I realize I was wrong." Jack smiled, throwing a stone that skipped 3 times on the water. "And I thought being rich solved all problems. I guess we were both mistaken, weren't we? What neither of the two boys could imagine was that their lives were about to face much greater challenges. In Robert Anderson's office, important documents were beginning to reveal secrets that could shake the foundations of that seemingly unshakable friendship. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over Tom's desk as he organized a stack of documents in the maintenance office. After 6 months working at Robert Anderson's company, his promotion to department manager had brought not only more responsibilities, but also access to information that was beginning to keep him up at night. It all started when he noticed discrepancies in the maintenance budgets. Overpriced equipment, services charged but never performed, and a series of contracts with shell companies that seemed to exist only on paper. At first, he tried to convince himself that they were just administrative errors, but the more he investigated, the more he realized the gravity of the situation. "Something's wrong here, Sarah," he confided to his wife during dinner, his voice heavy with concern. "The numbers don't add up. It's as if millions of dollars were disappearing into thin air." Sarah, who was serving the still steaming rice and beans, carefully set the pot on the table. "Tom, you need to be very careful with this. Remember what we have to lose." Jack, who was playing with Emily in the living room, approached the kitchen upon noticing the serious tone of the conversation. His parents rarely discussed important matters in front of the children, but this time they seemed too worried to notice his presence. "I can't simply ignore it, Sarah. Robert trusted me, gave our family an opportunity when we needed it most. How can I stay silent seeing something like this happen?" At the Anderson mansion, the situation was also tense. Melissa was organizing another of her charity events, but her mind was elsewhere. During a meeting with her club friends, she had heard comments about suspicious movements in her husband's companies. "Robert, we need to talk," she said, entering her husband's office late at night. "They're saying things in town, comments about the company, about dubious contracts." Robert, who was frantically typing on his laptop, barely raised his eyes. "Melissa, you know I don't discuss business at home. They're just gossip from jealous people." Ryan, hidden behind the office door, felt his heart tighten. In recent months, he had noticed changes in his father's behavior. Secret meetings, whispered phone calls, documents always locked in the safe. But what bothered him most was seeing how his father treated Tom, his best friend's father, with growing coldness. At school, Jack and Ryan remained inseparable, but something had changed. Conversations that were once cheerful now carried an invisible weight. During recess, sitting under the shade of a large tree, Ryan decided to share his concerns. "Jack, have you noticed anything different at home? My dad's been acting strange, Mom's always nervous, and I've overheard some conversations." Jack hesitated. He wanted to tell about his father's concerns, about the suspicious documents, but something held him back. He was afraid that the truth might destroy not only their friendship, but also everything his family had achieved. "Sometimes adults have problems we don't understand," Jack replied, choosing his words carefully. "But we're friends no matter what happens, right?" Ryan nodded, but both knew that a storm was approaching. The next day, Tom found his office ransacked. Someone had rummaged through his drawers during the night, and several important documents had disappeared. "Mr. Tom," called Anthony, the night security guard, with a trembling voice. "Mr. Anderson wants to see you immediately in his office." Tom's heart raced. Climbing the stairs to the top floor, each step seemed heavier than the last. When he entered Robert's office, he found not only his boss, but also two men in suits he had never seen before. "Tom," Robert began, his icy voice cutting through the air like a razor, "we need to discuss some irregularities found in your department." In the waiting room, Melissa waited with an enigmatic expression. When her eyes met Tom's, there was something different in them. It was no longer the disdain from before, but a mixture of fear and guilt. Meanwhile, at school, Jack and Ryan were planning a joint presentation for the science fair, unaware of the drama unfolding in the office. Their project was about clean energy and sustainability, inspired by the conversations they had about making the world a better place. "You know, Jack," said Ryan as they were drawing the posters, "sometimes I think we could change things when we grow up. Do things differently from adults, you know?" Jack smiled. but his smile didn't reach his eyes. That morning, he had overheard his father on the phone, his voice trembling as he said, "I can't keep pretending I don't see what's happening. I need to do something." The sun was setting over Gator Lake, tinting the waters red and gold. The same waters that had united two boys from different worlds now seemed to foreshadow difficult times. On the horizon, dark clouds were approaching, bringing with them a storm that would forever change everyone's destiny. The meeting with Robert Anderson stretched on for hours. When Tom finally left the office, his face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. In the elevator, he leaned against the mirrored wall, taking deep breaths as he tried to organize his thoughts. Robert's words still echoed in his mind. "Sometimes, Tom, it's better not to meddle in certain things. Some truths can hurt more than lies." In the waiting room, Melissa was still there, surprisingly. As Tom passed by her, her voice stopped him. "Tom, wait." He turned, finding an expression on her face he had never seen before. "My husband, he wasn't always like this. The power, the money, they change people. Mrs. Anderson, with all due respect, some choices define who we really are," Tom replied, maintaining his dignity even in that difficult moment. At school, Jack and Ryan continued working on their sustainable energy project, but something had changed. Ryan noticed that his friend was more distant, worried. "Jack, did something happen? You're different today," Ryan asked as they glued photos of solar panels onto the poster. Jack hesitated, playing with the glue in his hands. "Ryan, have you ever had to choose between doing the right thing and protecting those you love?" The question caught Ryan off guard. Before he could answer, they were interrupted by Melissa's arrival, who had come to pick up her son early. Her look at Jack was different from usual. There was a mixture of compassion and guilt that the boy couldn't understand. At home, Sarah was preparing sweets for a large order when Tom arrived. One look was enough to know something was wrong. "What happened, Tom?" "Sarah, they want me to sign documents that aren't true. Robert said it's just a formality, but..." Tom sat heavily at the kitchen table. "If I don't sign, I lose my job. If I sign, I lose my dignity." Jack, who was listening in hiding, felt his heart tighten. He ran to his room and grabbed the box where he kept the money from weekend candy sales. It wasn't much, but maybe it could help if his father lost his job. The next day, during lunch, at the Anderson mansion, a commitment that now seemed too heavy, tensions were palpable. Melissa tried to keep up appearances, serving her famous lemon pie, while Robert barely touched his food, constantly checking his cell phone. "Jack," Melissa called as the boy was leaving, "your parents are special people, never forget that." Ryan, who was observing everything with attention beyond his years, began to put the pieces together. His parents' whispered conversations, the hidden documents, the change in everyone's behavior. He decided to do something he had never done, before enter his father's office during the night. Meanwhile, Tom spent sleepless nights analyzing his options. He had copies of all the important documents stored in a safe place. He knew he needed to do something, but fear for his family's future paralyzed him. Sarah, sensing her husband's anguish, made a decision. One afternoon, while Jack was at school, she went to the main newspaper office in town, not to denounce but to seek advice from her old childhood friend Clarissa, who was now an investigative journalist. "Sarah, if what you're telling me is true, this is very serious," said Clarissa, after hearing her friend's account. "But we need concrete evidence." At the company, the atmosphere was getting increasingly tense. Employees whispered in the corridors, and Tom noticed sidelong glances in his direction. Robert had assigned an assistant to work directly with him, clearly someone to watch his every move. On a particularly tense afternoon, Ryan sought out Jack during the school break. "Jack, I need to tell you something. Last night I saw..." But before he could finish the sentence, they were interrupted by the school's loudspeaker. "Jack Smith, report to the principal's office immediately." In the principal's office, Jack found his mother with red eyes. "Son, your father, he resigned this morning." The news hit Jack like lightning. Ryan, who had followed his friend to the principal's office, heard everything through the half-open door. At that moment, something changed in his gaze, a determination he had never shown before. That night, as Jack's family tried to process the day's events, Ryan was making his own decision. In his room, with slightly trembling hands, he began to write a letter. "Dear Dad, I hope one day you'll understand why I'm doing this." The wind blew strongly over Gator Lake, stirring the waters that had witnessed the beginning of this story. The same waters that now seem to murmur that sometimes you have to lose everything to gain something much greater, your own dignity. The morning after Tom's resignation, the Anderson mansion was plunged into a heavy silence. Ryan hadn't slept, his red eyes fixed on the ceiling as he worked out his plan. The letter he had written during the night was folded in his pocket, a weight he carried along with his determination. During breakfast, Robert seemed distant, frantically checking the news on his tablet. Melissa, for her part, barely touched her cup of tea, casting worried glances at her son. "Ryan, are you okay? You look tired," she asked, noticing the dark circles under her son's eyes. "I'm fine, Mom. Just worried about Jack. Can I visit him? After school?" Melissa hesitated, exchanging a quick glance with Robert. "Son, maybe it's better to give it some time. Things are complicated." "Complicated? Why?" "Because Jack's dad chose to do the right thing?" Ryan's words came out sharper than he intended, making Robert look up from his tablet. "Ryan, don't talk about things you don't understand," Robert warned, his voice laden with authority. "Maybe I understand more than you think, Dad." At Jack's house, the situation was equally tense. Tom had spent the night organizing resumes, while Sarah was making calculations to see how long they could survive on their savings. Jack observed everything in silence, his heart heavy with the injustice of the situation. "Son, you need to go to school," Sarah reminded, noticing that Jack was still in his pajamas at 7:30 in the morning. "I don't want to go, Mom. What if Ryan—" "Jack," Tom interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, "we can't let this affect your friendship with Ryan. He's not to blame for the adults' choices." At school, the reunion of the friends was charged with emotion. Ryan pulled Jack to an isolated corner of the schoolyard during recess. "Jack, I need to tell you something," Ryan whispered, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "Last night I went into my dad's office." "Ryan, no, it's dangerous to get involved in this," Jack interrupted, worried. "Listen, Jack, I found documents, lots of them. I took photos of everything with my phone. There's something very wrong going on in the company, and your dad was right not to want to be part of it." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. "What are you going to do?" "I've already done it. I sent everything to journalist Clarissa. I know your mom talked to her yesterday." On the other side of town, Clarissa looked in astonishment at her computer. The photos she had received anonymously were the missing proof. Inflated contracts, doctored documents, a complex web of irregularities that extended over years. "Michael," she called her editor-in-chief, "I need you to see this. It's about the Anderson companies." At the mansion, Melissa found Robert's office. Open, drawers ransacked. Her heart raced when she noticed the absence of important documents. When she saw Ryan's cell phone on the desk, unlocked, with the photo gallery open, she understood everything. "Oh my God. Ryan, what have you done?" Robert arrived home early that day, his face livid. "Melissa, I need you and Ryan to pack your bags. We're going to spend some time at the beach house." "No, Dad." Ryan's voice sounded firm from the office door. "I'm not going to run away. I learned from Jack that sometimes we need to have the courage to face the consequences of our choices." Melissa, in tears, hugged her son. For the first time in years, she saw Robert not as the powerful businessman, but as the man who had lost himself in his own power. At the newspaper office, Clarissa was working furiously on her article. The evidence was irrefutable. On her desk, a photo of two children playing by a lake, Jack and Ryan on the day of the science fair, reminded her of what really mattered. Sarah received an unexpected call from Melissa. "Sarah, I need your help. Not for our husbands, but for our children. They've shown us what it means to have true courage." Meanwhile, on the shore of Gator Lake, Jack and Ryan sat in the same place where it all began. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Jack asked, throwing a pebble into the water. Ryan smiled, a sad but determined smile. "You know what you told me when you saved me that day. That anyone would have done the same, but it's not true, Jack. Not everyone has that courage. You taught me that. On the horizon, dark clouds were approaching, bringing with them a storm. That would forever change everyone's destiny. But this time it wasn't a storm of destruction, but of renewal. A storm that would wash away the lies and bring to light a long-hidden truth. The headline of the Guardian newspaper, emblazoned in bold letters, "Anderson Business Empire Under Investigation." The article, signed by Clarissa Torres, exposed, with surgical precision, an extensive network of administrative irregularities. In the main photo, the imposing company headquarters gleamed under the morning sun, oblivious to the whirlwind forming within. Robert Anderson was in his office when the first edition reached his hands. His face, normally controlled, betrayed a mixture of anger and disbelief. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, shareholders, business partners, all demanding explanations. How could this happen? He muttered to himself, running his hands through his graying hair. His gaze fell on a photo on his desk, baby Ryan in his arms, an innocent smile that now seemed to silently accuse him. At home, Melissa found Ryan in his room, packing his school bag as if it were a normal day. "Son," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "do you have any idea what you've done?" Ryan looked up, surprisingly calm. "Yes, Mum. I did what Dad always taught me, to fight for what's right. At least that's what he used to say before." Melissa sat on her son's bed, silent tears running down her face. "When did we lose our way, Ryan? When did we let money and status become more important than our integrity?" At Jack's house, the atmosphere was equally tense. Tom was reading the article carefully, while Sarah prepared a hearty coffee. In times of crisis, she always turned to the kitchen as a refuge. "Sarah, look at this," Tom called, pointing to a specific section of the report. "They mentioned documents I never had access to. Someone from inside, someone close to Robert, must have helped with this information." Jack, trying to concentrate on his homework, couldn't stop thinking about Ryan. His friend had risked everything: his relationship with his parents, his comfortable life, his reputation, for what he believed was right. At school, the two friends met during the break, ignoring the looks and whispers of the other students. They sat in their usual spot, under the big tree in the courtyard. "My dad hasn't left the office since yesterday," Ryan commented, playing with his untouched sandwich. "Mum's different too. For the first time, she seems awake." Jack put his hand on his friend's shoulder. "You were very brave, Ryan, but you didn't have to do it alone." "I didn't do it alone, Jack. Your family taught me what it means to have principles. Seeing your dad give up his job to not be complicit in something wrong, that made me realize I needed to do my part too." At the newspaper office, Clarissa received an unexpected call from Melissa Anderson. The journalist hesitated before answering, but the voice on the other end of the line surprised her. "Miss Torres, this is Melissa Anderson. I'd like to tell my side of the story. There are things that need to be said." Meanwhile, in Robert's office, a tense meeting was unfolding with the company's board. The accusations were too serious to be ignored. One of the oldest directors, Mr. Thompson, who had known Robert since the beginning of his career, spoke up. "Robert, you built all this from scratch. You have a chance to do the right thing now. For your employees, for your family, for your son." The mention of Ryan made Robert pause. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember the young idealist he had been, the dreams he had of building something meaningful, something his son could be proud of one day. Sarah received a surprise visit that afternoon. Melissa was standing at her door carrying a cardboard box. "These are the brownies you made for that lunch," Melissa explained with a shy smile. "I kept the recipe. It was the first time I saw Robert really smile in years." The two women looked at each other, recognizing in each other the strength that only mothers possess. Sarah opened the door wider, inviting Melissa in. "I think it's time we made a fresh batch," Sarah said, returning the smile, "and talk about how we can help our children weather this storm." At the end of that afternoon, as the clouds began to dissipate over Gator Lake, Jack and Ryan were sitting on its shore as they had so many times before. But something had changed. They were no longer just two boys from different worlds united by an accident. They were two young people who had discovered together the true meaning of friendship, courage, and integrity. "You know, Ryan," Jack said, watching the reflection of the setting sun on the water, "that day when you were drowning, I think it wasn't just you who was saved." Ryan looked at his friend, understanding perfectly what he meant. Sometimes true heroism isn't in grand acts of bravery, but in the daily courage to do what's right, even when it means facing your own storms. Melissa Anderson's interview was published in a special Sunday edition of The Guardian. It wasn't just an account of the company's irregularities, but a deep reflection on values, choices, and redemption. Melissa spoke about how money and status had, little by little, eroded her family's principles, and how her son Ryan had been the catalyst for a long-needed change. "I spent years believing that protecting our social position was more important than protecting our integrity," she confessed to Clarissa. "It took a 10-year-old child to teach me the true meaning of courage." Robert read the interview in his office, each word from his wife weighing like lead on his heart. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind. Internal investigations, endless meetings with lawyers, the shaken confidence of business partners. But nothing hurt more than the distant look in his son's eyes. That morning, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He called an extraordinary board meeting and announced his temporary withdrawal from the presidency. "I built this company from scratch," he said, his voice firm despite the contained emotion. "But at some point along the way, I forgot why I built it. It wasn't for the money or the power. It was to leave a legacy that my son could be proud of." At Jack's house, things were starting to take a new direction. Tom had received 3 job offers after the article was published. His integrity had become his greatest credential. Sarah, in turn, saw her small sweets business grow. The family's story had touched many hearts, and orders kept pouring in. "I'm going to need help with the orders," Sarah said during dinner. "Melissa offered to be my partner. She said she always dreamed of having her own business, but never had the courage to try." Jack and Emily looked at each other, surprised. The idea of their mothers working together seemed surreal a few weeks ago, but now it made perfect sense. At school, things were changing too. The history teacher had used the case as an example in a lesson on ethics and citizenship, and Jack and Ryan were invited to share their experience with their classmates. "We're not heroes," Ryan explained to the class. "We just did what we believed was right. Sometimes courage is in small daily decisions." The old Anderson Company headquarters was undergoing transformations. The board, under new leadership, was implementing significant changes. Tom was invited to lead a new compliance department, with autonomy to ensure that past mistakes would not be repeated. "I don't know if I should accept," he confided to Sarah. "After everything that happened, it's precisely because of everything that happened that you should accept," she replied, holding his hands. "Who better than you to ensure that things are done the right way?" Melissa and Sarah transformed the Anderson kitchen into a small candy production center. Lakeside Sweets, as they called the business, quickly gained fame in the city, not just for the delicious brownies, but for the story of friendship and redemption it represented. Robert, after weeks of reflection, sought out Ryan in his room. He found his son doing homework with Jack, like in the old days. "Can I join you?" he asked hesitantly. Ryan looked at his father, seeing for the first time in a long time the man he admired in his childhood. "Sure, Dad. We're doing a project on social transformation." "You know," Robert began, sitting on the edge of the bed, "I was thinking about using part of the company's resources to create a foundation, something focused on education and community development. I'd like to hear your ideas about it." Ryan's eyes sparkled, and Jack smiled, recognizing in that moment the beginning of something special. On the shore of Gator Lake, now a frequent meeting point for both families, Melissa and Sarah were organizing a small picnic. Tom and Robert were talking about the company's new projects, while the children played in the water, this time all knowing how to swim. "It's funny," Jack commented to Ryan as they watched their families interacting, "how sometimes we need to lose something to gain something much bigger." Ryan nodded, thoughtful. "You know what's even funnier? It all started with a dive in this lake. Who would have thought that day would change so many lives? The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. The waters of the lake, silent witnesses to this entire story, reflected not only the sky but also the glow of a new hope. A hope built not on fortunes or appearances, but on something far more valuable: truth, courage, and the transformative power of friendship. 6 months passed since the great revelations. The old Anderson Company headquarters had transformed not just physically but in its very spirit. The old golden and imposing logo gave way to a more modern and welcoming one, and the building now housed, in addition to corporate offices, a professional training center for young people from the community. The New Horizons Foundation, conceived by Robert with the help of Ryan and Jack, was beginning to take shape. The pilot project offered technical courses and entrepreneurship workshops for residents of the Gator Lake region, transforming lives through education and opportunities. "I never imagined I'd see something like this," Tom commented during a foundation board meeting, of which he was now a part. "We're using the company's power to really make a difference in people's lives." Robert, who chaired the meeting, had visibly changed. The old formal clothes gave way to a more casual look, and his smile, once rare, appeared frequently. "All of this started with 2 boys teaching us about courage and integrity," he replied, looking proudly at a photo of Ryan and Jack on the wall of the room. In the industrial kitchen of Lakeside Suites, Melissa and Sarah coordinated a team of 15 women, all residents of the neighborhood. What started as a small partnership had turned into a thriving and socially responsible business. "Who would have thought I'd trade my social meetings for aprons and recipes?" Melissa laughed, while teaching a new employee how to make brownies. "And the most incredible thing is that I've never felt so fulfilled." Sarah smiled, adjusting the company's new uniform that she had designed herself. Sometimes fate has a funny way of showing us our true path. Jack and Ryan, now 11 years old, had transformed their sustainable energy project from the science fair into something bigger. With the foundation's support, they were developing an environmental awareness program in schools across the region, starting with their own. "You see," the principal commented during a presentation by the boys, "how 2 children can inspire an entire community to think differently." Tom faced his own challenges at the company. Some old executives still resisted the new policies of transparency and social responsibility. During a particularly tense meeting, one of them questioned, "Why complicate things so much? It was easier before." "Easier doesn't mean more right," Tom replied, his voice calm but firm. "And our results prove that integrity and success can go hand in hand." Robert, who was following the discussion, smiled discreetly. The man he had once hired out of gratitude had become one of the most important pillars of the company's new phase. Emily, Jack's sister, now 6 years old, had become a kind of mascot for the foundation. Her presence at meetings and events always brought lightness and a reminder of the initial purpose of everything. "Uncle Robert," she asked one day, with the typical innocence of children, "why do adults take so long to do the right thing?" The question caught Robert by surprise, making him reflect deeply. "You know, Emily, sometimes we get so lost trying to be important that we forget to be good." Gator Lake, now completely revitalized, had become a symbol of transformation in the city. The ecological park on its shores received visitors from all over the country, interested in understanding how a community managed to unite economic development and social responsibility. Clarissa, who continued to follow the story, was preparing a book about the entire journey. "The most fascinating thing," she wrote in her preface, "is how a series of small, courageous decisions can trigger such a profound transformation." During preparation for a conference, Jack found his old candy box in the foundation's storage. Someone had turned it into an exhibition piece with a plaque that read, "Where it all began." "It's strange," he said to Ryan, "to think that all this change started with brownies and an unplanned dive." Ryan picked up the box, looking at it fondly. "Maybe that's how big changes happen, not with grand plans, but with small acts of courage." The end of that day, the 2 families gathered for a picnic by the lake. As the children played in the water, now clean and safe, the adults contemplated the sunset. "You know what's most incredible?" Sarah commented, serving a new brownie recipe. It's not just what we've managed to build, but how it has changed who we are." Melissa hugged her friend, discreet tears shining in her eyes. "And to think I almost lost all this because of prejudice and pride." The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of hope. The lake, a silent witness to this entire journey, reflected not just the sky, but also the glow of a future that no one could have imagined a year before. 5 years had passed since that fateful day at Gator Lake. Time, like a patient artist, had given the final touches to a story that began with an act of childish courage and transformed into something much greater. The New Horizons Foundation was now present in 20 cities, having directly impacted the lives of more than 50,000 people. The social business model developed by Robert and his team had become a case study in universities, proving that it was possible to combine business success with social responsibility. Jack and Ryan, now 15 years old, had become nationally recognized young leaders. Their environmental project in schools had evolved into a complete socio-environmental education program, adopted by the State Department of Education as a model to be followed. "Do you remember that first day?" Jack asked during the inauguration ceremony of the 10th Lakeside Suites unit, now a network of confectionery schools that trained professionals in underprivileged communities. "How could I forget?" Ryan replied, adjusting the tie he still wasn't used to wearing. "I was just a spoiled kid drowning, and you were a candy seller with a heart, bigger than the world." Sarah and Melissa had transformed their partnership into an empire of good. Lakeside Suites wasn't just a successful brand, but a symbol of social transformation. Each unit functioned as a professional training center, offering opportunities for women in vulnerable situations. "You know what makes me most proud?" Melissa commented during an interview for a business magazine. "It's not the financial success, but seeing how each of our employees becomes an agent of change in her own community." Tom, now Executive Director of Social Responsibility for the Anderson Group, traveled the country sharing the company's transformation experience. His story of integrity had become an example of how the courage to do the right thing, even in the most difficult moments, can generate profound and lasting changes. Robert, although still chairman of the board, dedicated most of his time to the foundation. The businessman who had once lost himself in power had found his true purpose in serving others. "My biggest mistake," he reflected during a TED Talk that went viral on social media, "was confusing success with value. It was 2 children who taught me that our true value lies in the positive impact we have on others' lives." Emily, now 11 years old, had inherited the family's social entrepreneurial spirit. She had created a storytelling project for hospitalized children using characters and lessons learned from her own journey. Gator Lake, once a divider of worlds, was now a symbol of unity and transformation. The ecological park on its shores had become a model of sustainability and social inclusion, receiving visitors from all over the world. Clarissa, who had followed the entire story from the beginning, published her book, The Courage to Change, which became a bestseller and was translated into several languages. "The most extraordinary thing about this story," she wrote in the epilogue, "is how the transformative power of truth and friendship can create waves of change that spread infinitely." On a special afternoon, the 2 families gathered for an intimate celebration by the lake. The location had been purposely chosen. It was where everything had begun. "Sometimes I wonder," Jack said, watching the sunset, "what would have happened if I hadn't jumped into the water that day?" "I probably wouldn't be here," Ryan joked, "but I think it goes beyond that. That dive didn't just save one life, it saved the best in all of us." Sarah served a special batch of brownies, made with the same recipe as those Jack used to sell. Melissa, helping to distribute the sweets, smiled as she remembered how she once considered such an activity beneath her social position. "You know what's most beautiful?" Tom commented, hugging his family. "Seeing how a story that began with 2 children continues to inspire new generations to be better." Robert, observing the group, felt his eyes water. "I spent years building an empire," he said, "but only found true wealth when I learned to build bridges." Night was falling gently over Gator Lake. The waters, which had once witnessed the beginning of that extraordinary journey, now reflected the lights of the park and the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. It was as if nature itself was celebrating the transformative power of love, friendship, and courage. Jack and Ryan, sitting on the shore of the lake as so many times before, were now planning new projects, dreaming of ways to further expand the positive impact they had initiated. "You know what I learned from all this?" Jack said, throwing a pebble into the water and watching the circles expand. "That sometimes the greatest miracles begin with the smallest actions." Ryan smiled, understanding perfectly. "And that true courage isn't in not being afraid, but in doing what's right, even when we're scared." The future opened before them, like a book with blank pages, ready to be filled with new stories of transformation and hope. The lesson they had learned, and taught to so many others, would continue to echo through time. That a person's true value isn't in what they possess, but in the good they are capable of doing in the world. And so, under the starry sky of Georgia, the story that had begun with an act of childish courage confirmed its deepest message, that we are never too young to make a difference, nor too old to learn and change.